Well, one of the points is that you see these Asian countries that have relied so heavily on the Middle East for their crude oil and the time that it takes and the reliance on a route that in many respects, a terrorist regime has been able to frequently disrupt, or at the very least threaten to disrupt over the course of years and decades. Now they start looking east to the United States, where we have been unleashing energy dominance here at home with new projects that are now on the horizon. President Trump has been advocating strongly for a new liquid LNG facility, a pipeline that would run alongside the Trans-Alaska pipeline in Alaska. Crude oil in Alaska has the ability to have a lot more oil pass through it. And that route for 60 years with Japan, for example, has been able to deliver that crude oil to Asia, to Japan,
but sir, if I may, how are you
with freedom of navigation?
Of course, I'm sorry for interrupting, but if I may, are you not getting any pushback that even if you make some of these deals and President Trump becomes displeased with these countries, he could claw back that energy?
Well, what we just witnessed over the course of the last 48 hours is that many countries in the Indo-Pacific are gravitating towards the United States. We had over $50 billion worth of deals with U.S. companies. All the dialogue that has taken place has been with an understanding that by entering into new deals with the United States, it allows them to reduce their reliance which was so heavily concentrated in the Middle East. And on top of it, it takes just a fraction of time to get that energy supply to Japan and these other countries compared to 28 days to get it from the Middle East. It'll take 8 days to get there from Alaska. So that is another dynamic, but just a lot of very robust, energetic, motivated conversation and engagement from the ministers of energy of all of these countries trying to cut deals with the United States.
Mr. Administrator,
and actually cutting deals.
You might have heard Christina say at the top here, this is, of course, a summit that was scheduled before the war began. And I'm curious, given what has happened here, how much that situation is kind of coloring the conversations that you're having with allies and companies at the summit over the course of this weekend.
One of the topics that were discussed, one of the pillars of this weekend is about the supply chain. And for Indo-Pacific countries, they are, I think, far more motivated. They were talking quite frequently about wanting to diversify their supply chain, that they want to start looking elsewhere because they were relying too heavily on the Middle Eastern region for their supply chain. Also diversifying how they provide energy to their people. Some countries are further along in talking about nuclear, others relying more on LNG, others talking about coal. It really ran the gamut, and depending on which country we were sitting in for a bilateral or for meetings amongst all the energy ministers, diversification of the supply chain was not just a pillar going into this weekend, but something that was frequently talked about throughout.
I have a couple of nuclear questions, but I do want to start with, when we look at the possible consequences of a regime falling in Iran, one of the concerns we've been hearing from nuclear experts and security experts is how to secure and possibly transport out that enriched uranium in that country. Is there a plan to do it? Does it involve American boots on the ground? And what can you tell us about what's going to happen there?
Yeah, that's a question that I, as administrator of EPA, would not want to answer on behalf of the President, the White House, the Department of War, Department of State, or Department of Energy. The transport of uranium out of Iran and the other aspects of your question are questions that I, as EPA administrator, wouldn't be appropriate to be the one answering. Great questions, but I wouldn't be the right person for the administration to answer that.
Fair enough.
Let me ask you something kind of complementary to the strikes on Iran, and that is we've seen the administration open up those pipelines off the coast of California once again. And there are a lot of Californians who remember that oil spill back in 2015, that Refugio oil spill, are worried about the integrity of those pipelines. And I wonder what your message is to them as we hear from the governor of that state and others saying, look, this is something that shouldn't be happening right now in light of the fact that there are 100,000 gallons of barrels of oil that were spilled as a result of that back in 2015.
Well, I mean, it's always important to remember lessons learned of the past, to be leaning into new technology, to make sure that with new projects for extraction, for processing, anywhere in America, that in the partnerships and in the requests for permits, and as this investment goes forward, that we are learning the lessons of the past and that we're doing it as safely as possible. I often talk about how I strongly believe that in the United States, we tap into our own energy supplies so much safer than so many other countries elsewhere around the world, and that runs across the gamut on all different kinds of ways that energy is extracted. So yeah, to your question, which is a great one, it's important that when these projects, when these permits are moving forward, that we're doing it as responsibly as possible.
I also want to ask you, as you talk about U.S. energy dominance, obviously the president and a lot of people have said the U.S. should look more into nuclear. One of the things your agency and the Department of Energy have done is change some of the regulations for trying to build nuclear plants and nuclear reactors. That's had mixed results because it's trying to bring these plants online faster and solve this issue. But some of the criticism is it's taking away some of the safety concerns, including things like firearms trainings and emergency drills, which critics are saying could make these plants more vulnerable to theft of nuclear power. What is your response to that? And do you have any concerns with lessening regulations around nuclear reactors?
At no point since I was sworn in as administrator 14 months ago with any nuclear project that I've seen anywhere inside the United States have I seen anything but the highest level of competency brought to bear with very incredible staffers, many career staffers here at EPA doing our due diligence. Trump's speed is about operating quickly. The way that we have implemented that directive from the president is one that I can very confidently say, with eyes on many different nuclear projects across this country, that they're being done extraordinarily competently. And quite frankly, the people, the companies that are making the big investment, they have every motivation to protect that investment. And I would say that a lot of these companies are breaking ground on projects with goals of breaking ground on many more projects. So it's almost a proof of concept when, Oklo in Idaho Falls, Idaho is breaking ground, which they have recently done. They want to build many more. I can think of their project in Oak Ridge in Tennessee, as well as other states. Right now, there are a lot of retrofits, a lot of small modular reactors. There are a lot of nuclear projects. Yes, the permitting is going much faster under President Trump, but due diligence and competency has been all over from the government standpoint as well as from the investor standpoint.